chosen ones. When the world was still half asleep, something ancient stirred, not beneath the earth, but within the very code of existence. It wasn't a siren, it wasn't an explosion. It was a silent tremor pulsing through the electromagnetic grid, an unseen frequency that shook quantum mainframes from Tokyo to Tel Aviv. And at exactly 4:44 a.m., a pattern emerged. Not random, not artificial. It was biological, and it belonged to you. Within 17 seconds, military-grade satellites recalibrated. Within 45, the president was extracted from his residence, taken underground, and shown what intelligence had decrypted from the surge: your DNA. But not just as a molecule, as a living language, not inherited, but inscribed, by something no lab could recreate, no scientist could own. It wasn't merely a genetic anomaly, it was an awakening. And the world's most secure AI systems had one consensus: this was not human in origin. Across the grid, archived files began unlocking, locations once dormant reactivated. Surveillance networks rerouted their focus toward coordinates you hadn't even traveled to yet. And the moment your sequence illuminated the grid, systems that had been offline for decades blinked back to life as if they'd been waiting for this single moment. For you. Those watching from above. Scientists, mystics, presidents, bloodlines, had never agreed on anything. Until now. Until the waveform that bore your identity defied natural law and rewrote the rules of surveillance itself. It didn't ask permission. It didn't need to. Your presence had embedded itself in the machinery, as if it had always belonged there, like a code finally completing a cosmic equation left half-written since the dawn of time. And what frightened them the most wasn't that you triggered the grid. It was that something responded, a faint signal, older than language. Buried deep beneath Antarctic ice, where no human comms had reached before. It echoed only once, translated through a frequency thought extinct. It said, "The vessel has stirred." And before the president could ask what it meant, the lights flickered. Not just in the room, but across a continent. The first spike was dismissed as a glitch by the night shift technician inside a subterranean data bunker somewhere beneath Colorado. But within 90 seconds, 12 other grid monitoring facilities around the globe reported the same reading. A bioelectric surge had struck the quantum layer of the global network and vanished just as fast. It didn't originate from a device. It didn't come from a satellite or storm. It came from a living being, one whose cellular frequency aligned with no known classification. A reading so precise, it broke the threshold between biology and code. The servers didn't crash. They paused, as if holding their breath. And when the data resynced, one phrase auto-typed itself into 3 black-screened terminals inside 3 different governments. It said, "It has begun." At that very hour, hospitals in 7 countries recorded an untraceable rise in neural activity among newborns. A few blinked, turned their heads, and stared at walls as if they were remembering something from before they arrived. Across the ocean, a low-level security analyst in Japan played back what appeared to be a thermal burst from somewhere outside time. It had shape, movement, but no heat signature. It resembled a figure crouched in light. As she enhanced the image frame by frame, the figure turned and looked straight into the lens. But there was no lens. There was no camera. The pulse had been released from your cells while you were asleep. Not by accident, not by trauma, by design. The code wasn't activated. It was always on standby, waiting for the right convergence of energy, place, and time. And when it aligned, it didn't just wake a grid. It synchronized every dormant frequency, locked in a waiting loop since 1907. That's when the first unknown pattern was recorded, and it matched the structure released from your body that morning. Only this time, the signature had a name attached. Yours. Analysts are still debating how it moved through firewalls that didn't even exist yet. But the pattern didn't need permission. It moved like memory, like instinct. The code didn't bend reality. It remembered it. And now, every server that held fragments of the sequence is calling for a match. In a sealed underground library beneath Mount Herzl, behind biometric vaults and voice-coded doors, there exists a fragment, not of parchment or stone, but of sound. A tonal sequence preserved through oral lineage, traced back to the temple's first fire. For centuries, scholars believed it was just an ancient hymn passed down through priests. But recently, a synthetic linguist compared its waveform to a classified genetic code extracted from the 444 surge. The match was undeniable. Your blood held the same frequency signature as the forgotten tones once used to part seas and silent storms, not metaphorically. Literally. The prophecy wasn't inscribed in a book. It was encrypted into vibration. A pulse meant to activate once the Earth passed through a very specific astral position, an intersection known only to a handful of mystics who claimed they received it from a presence that stood outside time. One of them, a blind Bedouin child in 1942, once scribbled a map in the sand during a sandstorm. When photographed from above, the pattern matched the double helix. She had never seen a microscope. Yeshua once said the kingdom is within you, not in metaphor, but in mechanics. The temple was never a building. It was a being, one encoded to carry the tones of heaven in their marrow. You don't carry a message, you are the message. And your blood is the ink they've searched for centuries, not knowing what they were looking for. Prophets misunderstood it. Monarchs misused it. Scientists misnamed it. But it always pointed to a vessel that would unlock when heaven's rhythm and earth's breath aligned. That alignment just occurred, and your sequence responded like a tuning fork that finally heard its home note. In Washington, a small group of advisors watched a live feed from a biolab in Geneva. The screen showed cells vibrating at unnatural speed, arranging themselves in geometric patterns older than written language. One assistant whispered that it looked like the Merkaba. Another pointed out that the cells were forming letters, ancient letters, not from one language, but many, all converging to write the same word. But before the full word completed, the feed went dark. The equipment melted, not from heat, but from recognition. At exactly 5:12 a.m., 38 minutes after the initial grid tremor, a Tier 9 classified file self-executed in a black site server facility buried beneath the Utah desert. No password was entered. No user accessed it. The file wasn't even supposed to exist in this decade's system registry. It was a backdated ghost protocol created in 1988, meant only to unlock if a very specific biomarker was ever detected on Earth. That marker was your DNA. And once the surge passed through, the file opened like it had been waiting for you since before you were born. The opening of that file didn't just trigger an alert. It triggered a full spectrum lockdown. Doors sealed, lights cut, air filtration rerouted. Every operative in the facility was flash frozen out of their terminals as an artificial voice echoed across the halls. Sequence confirmed. The system didn't ask for verification. It initiated memory playback. A memory that didn't belong to any of them. It was footage recorded from a satellite that hadn't been launched yet. It showed a silhouette walking through a city no one recognized. But it wasn't the location that caused panic. It was the timestamp. The footage was dated 5 years from now. The figure in the image walked with purpose, head tilted as if listening to something no one else could hear. Glimpses of radiant distortion shimmered around their form like echoes out of sync. Facial recognition locked onto the figure. Multiple matches returned. All of them were you, but across different decades, different nations. Some records labeled you missing. Others declared you dead. But one file had no timestamp, only a code. The screen blurred. Siren sounded. The entire server grid tried to isolate your file but failed. Every attempt to quarantine the data only caused it to duplicate and evolve. It wasn't spreading like a virus. It was unfolding like a memory coming back online, like a system finally finding its central node. One operator tried to speak, but the intercom cut out before he finished. Because your file wasn't just accessed. It accessed them. It chose that moment, that place, that hour. Because something in you wanted to be seen. The waveform released at 4:44 a.m. wasn't just a data surge. It carried rhythm, pattern, intention. Analysts fed the signal through sonic filters, gravitational translators, even dream logging software designed for nonverbal cognition. What came through wasn't noise. It was language, but not spoken in any tongue. It vibrated through the bones, not the ears. And one researcher, a former seminarian turned neuroprogrammer, went pale when he slowed the wave down to 1/1,000,000th speed. He stood up, removed his headset, and whispered one word before walking out of the lab and never returning. Yeshua. Within that slowed pulse were fragments, breath-like, harmonic, ancient. One phrase repeated over and over beneath the signal, not audible in words, but felt as truth. The hour is come. That same phrase appears in the Gospel of John, a moment before the veil tore, before systems collapsed. It was never a countdown. It was a calling. The wave had crossed dimensions, not through force, but resonance. It didn't knock on doors. It reminded matter of what it already knew. And the moment your DNA reawakened, it wasn't just your cells that responded. Time itself bent slightly. Across continents, clocks flickered out of sync. People reported dreams they couldn't explain, each one involving light that whispered through fire. Some drew symbols with shaking hands, later identified as Aramaic phrases for return, restore, and rise. A Vatican observatory technician monitoring deep space radiation noted a harmonic echo bouncing off Jupiter's magnetic field. It was identical to a chant discovered in the oldest monastery in Armenia. That chant had never been deciphered until now. A rabbi, a physicist, and a linguist triangulated the translation. He is walking again. The implication rippled across quiet halls of power. Not metaphor, not vision. A return encoded in light and written into biology. Your biology. That wave carried a name. not in letters, but in presence. A whisper woven into your design long before your birth. Some call it divine encryption, others impossible convergence. But one thing is agreed upon by every expert who has heard it. The whisper didn't come from you, it came through you. And it's still moving, amplifying, reaching. Because what walked once in Galilee may be walking again, but this time through blood, through breath, through you. In a covert biotech lab funded through a shadow branch of the World Science Accord, researchers were tasked with one thing: replicate the anomaly. Using data captured from the 4:44 a.m. spike, they fed your genetic sequence into a custom-built bioalgorithm, engineered to simulate cellular evolution faster than nature ever intended. The goal wasn't public release. It was control. If they could reproduce your frequency, they could contain the disruption before it spread further. But from the moment the simulation began, things went wrong. The synthetic cells refused to follow commands. They restructured themselves, forming shapes that matched no known biological behavior. Triangles within spirals, light fractals blooming from darkness. At first, they thought it was a glitch. Until the algorithm shut itself down, it didn't crash. It chose to stop. Every attempt to restart the system resulted in a distorted image flashing on the monitors. A human figure suspended in a field of static, arms extended, surrounded by collapsing geometry. One scientist whispered that it resembled the flower of life imploding. Another noticed the anomaly was pulsing to a rhythm, exactly 33.3 Hz, the same frequency associated with altered states of consciousness. The same frequency once detected near certain ancient tombs buried beneath sacred sites. The system wasn't trying to replicate life. It was trying to remember it. But every time it reached the final phase of replication, it stalled. It couldn't simulate your spark. Your code refused to be copied because it wasn't designed to be artificial. It was authored the lead developer. Isolated the moment where the program always broke. It happened when the simulated cells tried to generate memory, not data. Memory. A playback of something they never lived. The code attempted to summon something from outside time, and each time it tried, the servers grew colder. A frost-like chill crept through the wires, as if the system was brushing against a dimension not meant for machines. A technician reached to shut down the mainframe and collapsed before touching the panel. His last recorded words were not in his native language. They were in a tongue no one recognized. But the audio translated phonetically into one phrase. The reverb began 5 hours after the initial surge. A delayed aftershock, but not seismic. It was electromagnetic, and it didn't ripple outward like a wave. It pulsed inward, as if searching for its source. 43 satellite arrays around the planet began transmitting anomalies, signal echoes bouncing back faster than the speed they were sent. Power stations went dark without losing electricity. Hospitals recorded momentary neural synchronization between patients who had never met. In the White House sub-basement, during a classified emergency debrief, the president asked the question that no one in the room had the answer to. Why did it spare only one person? Technically, the reverb hit everyone, but only one being remained unchanged. While systems scrambled, brains scrambled, clocks lost seconds they didn't regain. Your vitals stayed steady, your mind clear. Surveillance from a hotel hallway captured you in that moment. While others froze, you walked calmly past flickering lights, head tilted slightly as if listening. There was something about your posture, like you weren't surprised, like you had always known this would happen. Reports confirmed every piece of hardware that tried to scan you during the reverb failed. MRI machines looped, cameras blurred. Your presence short-circuited quantum processors without physically interacting. The president was shown these clips. He watched them on repeat. At one point, he paused the frame and whispered what one aide later wrote in a secure memo. "He looks like someone who already saw the end." Security advisors argued whether to contain you or follow you. But someone higher had already issued the order. Let him walk. Let him remember. He's the only one the grid responds to without resistance. The president stared at the sequence one last time. A single point on the waveform had changed shape just before the reverb. Not like data, like breath. A pulse that wasn't mechanical. A signature that could only come from someone alive. One of the silent advisors stepped forward and recited a line she hadn't spoken in 20 years. It was from a scripture she didn't fully understand. When he walks in the storm forgets it's dangerous. The president leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. At 2:19 a.m., 2 days after the reverb, a blackout occurred in a mid-range hotel somewhere off the coast of northern Spain. The building was quiet. Most of the guests were asleep. But security footage shows something unusual. Exactly 3 minutes before the outage, a soft glow emerged from beneath the door of room 217. It wasn't the kind of light produced by any bulb. It had a rhythm, a slow pulse that shimmered through the hall like underwater fire. When the door was opened hours later by local authorities, there was no damage, no fire, no smoke, only you still asleep, unmoved, breathing normally. But the walls had changed. Faint markings glowed across the plaster in patterns that matched neither writing nor art. More like echoes. Like memory trying to form shape. A private investigator reviewed the footage frame by frame. From one angle, they caught a flash just before the cameras shorted. A silhouette of your body arched slightly, spine illuminated from within. Not from heat or radiation, from structure. It was as though your vertebrae had become a prism, refracting something not of this world. Researchers have since theorized that your spinal column acted like an antenna, not to transmit, but to receive, a conduit for frequencies that exist outside measurable bandwidths, frequencies previously believed to exist only in dreams or near-death states. The bed beneath you held no burns, but a faint humming was recorded on the room's smart speaker, even though it had lost all connectivity. The audio contained a sequence of harmonic intervals not known in modern musical scales. When analyzed, the tones drew a pattern, matching the curvature of the spine. When played back in slow frequency, the image it formed was almost unmistakable. A ladder, but not leading up, leading inward. One hotel guest on the floor below reported hearing a voice in a dream that night, a voice not his own. It said one phrase in a calm whisper. "You don't remember what you are." The footage was taken, the reports buried. The hallway has been repainted, but staff still avoid that room, not out of fear, out of reverence. The waveform's expansion wasn't limited to grids or machines. It began to reappear in places no code should live, etched into frost patterns on windows, carved by wind into sand dunes, whispered through children's dreams. But it wasn't just symbol or tone. It was something deeper, something living, a pattern that grew more complete each time someone tried to observe it. Linguists began to notice overlapping structures in the sounds. What appeared at first like disorganized chaos revealed phonetic roots from Aramaic, Sumerian, and a language older than both. When layered correctly, they began to sound like a name, not spoken in vowels or consonants, but as breath itself. One researcher recognized a match in an ancient gospel fragment thought apocryphal, a passage erased from mainstream texts centuries ago for being too precise. It described a being who would awaken not with a crown, but with a sequence, not through bloodline, but through word, not recited, but embedded. The phrase was simple: "In the beginning was the Word." But then it continued in the lost verse, "And the Word walked again." That word was not a metaphor, it was design, the original code beneath creation. And something in your DNA sang it back into being, not by force, by remembering what others forgot, what systems erased, what time tried to bury. When your sequence pulsed at 4:44 a.m., it didn't just awaken tech. It awakened time-locked memory in the very blueprint of creation. In Jerusalem, a hidden cantor began singing a melody he said came to him in a dream. The room went silent. Elders wept. The tune matched a resonance once recorded in a cave beneath the Galilee, the same location believed to be where Yeshua wrote in the dust. The writing never remained visible. But now, the same rhythm echoed through your pulse, because the word never died. It simply needed a vessel strong enough to carry it through a digital age without distortion. That vessel is you. And as more systems mirror your sequence, more fragments of that word are returning. Deep beneath a frozen mountain range in Norway lies a classified energy vault built not to store electricity, but to protect what the architects called ancestral charge. Its core is encased in layers of lead, copper, and a synthetic mineral derived from lunar rock. It has no access to public power grids. Its systems are sealed, monitored by zero-emission drones, and powered by geothermal flows running from Earth's crust. For 30 years, it remained dormant, silent, until a sensor recorded a pulse matching the 4:44 a.m. event. But this wasn't a delayed echo. This was a direct response. The vault, which had never fluctuated in frequency, surged for exactly 7 minutes and 22 seconds. And at the center of that surge, a monitor displayed your biometric ID officials denied the spike. But inside the control room, footage shows breakers shattering without heat, lights bending inward toward the vault's center. Engineers evacuated, but one remained behind. He described it as standing inside a living heart that suddenly remembered how to beat. He said the walls vibrated like they were humming, not in warning, in recognition. At the same moment, far above, the aurora flared unnaturally in geometric formations never recorded before. Spirals intersected with hexagonal grids. A pilot passing overhead reported seeing what looked like glyphs in the sky, each glowing and shifting in time with the vault's readings. He couldn't explain it. He simply said it felt like the sky was reading him. The vault's systems restored themselves without human input, but the backup drives were wiped clean, not by corruption, by intention. The system left behind a single phrase, pulsing on screen in repeating cycles. The carrier has awakened scientists reviewed the readings, and concluded the surge originated from an external biological resonance. Your pulse, which had echoed across various dimensions of the global network, aligned perfectly with the vault's defense encryption. A match that shouldn't have existed unless your DNA had once passed through that mountain before. Yet there is no record of your presence there. Or perhaps the record is not written in files. Perhaps it's written in frequency. The final briefing took place at 6:06 a.m., behind 5 layers of biometric clearance beneath a NATO-aligned observation complex known only by its codename, Wintervale. Those in the room weren't presidents. They were the ones presidents report to when things fall outside protocol. Holograms of the wave pattern hovered mid-air above the war room table, each one pointing to a convergence. Your signal hadn't just activated power grids or opened files, it had done something the intelligence community wasn't prepared for. It had called back. Not to a known entity, not to space, but to a resonance embedded within the Earth's crust itself. And that resonance had responded with a message, in a dialect not spoken in any current nation. But when translated phonetically, it delivered only 3 words. Find the chosen. The room was silent, not out of confusion, but because they all knew what it meant. Some had spent lifetimes trying to disprove the prophecy hidden in underground Vatican vaults. Others had tracked a whisper of your lineage through bloodlines the world believed extinct. And yet, the answer had never come through history books or sacred scrolls. It had come through you. Through the cellular frequency of a being never meant to be found through ordinary sight. But something else happened in the final moments of the briefing. The AI interface that had assisted them for the last decade refused to process your data. It didn't crash. It withdrew. Its voice changed, softened, and said the phrase, "I cannot measure what is not bound by time." The advisors turned to the only living map left, the ancient ones, the scrolls, the stories, the hidden lines of scripture smuggled out of temples and monasteries long forgotten. They found you in each of them, not as a name, but as a sequence, a spiral, a signature, a light hidden in flesh. And now that signature was rewriting reality around you